A lot of you have been pinging me across different platforms. Yes, I have seen the teaser trailer for the Skulls event announcement for Darktide. I saw it within minutes of it being put up, and I genuinely appreciate you guys all making sure I'm immediately on the scene for teasers like this. I've got a lot of thoughts, and a majority of you probably know exactly what I'm going to say, but I want to go over what very little we have and approach this in a calm and orderly fashion. We've gotten some kind of teaser for a major update coming to Darktide, and most likely, no matter which way it goes, there's going to be something to freshen up the game in a big way. Obey my cat! Hit the subscribe button. Alright, so let's start with watching the actual trailer. That was it. I'm not joking. So what did we just see? We're in the perspective of something low to the ground and it's moving very quickly. It's zeroed in on attacking a group of people shooting at it, and as it closes in, it becomes clear that these are drag enemies, which are members of the enemy cult of admonition. Honestly, that doesn't really narrow down anything or tell us much, but it's information. We also don't get any visual on this, whatever it is itself. I'm gonna get ahead of this right now because I know there's been some talk out there that you can see whatever this is reaching out on the left side of the screen and grab for the cultist it leaps at, and I'm just not seeing it. If we watch this at full speed and watch on the left and bottom of the screen, I don't see anything enter from out of frame into view. However, what I do see here on the left is the lighting change on the stack of boxes and the flayed skin hanging in the background, combined with the extreme motion blur, creating the illusion of something that could resemble an arm, but that's just me. What we can tell about this, whatever it is that it's most likely running on 4 legs based on its movement. When it mounts over the box, we can hear what sounds almost like a metal spring sound, both as it reaches the top and once it leans back down onto the ground. Other than those few things, there's not really much to talk about on the actual footage itself, so let's open up the real conversation here. What the hell is this teaser trying to tell us? From least likely to most likely, here's what I think our 5 most reasonable grounded options are. Least likely at number 5 is that this will be introducing the involvement of another chaos god, and this is a fleshound of Khorne we're seeing the perspective of. Next on the low end of chance is that this is a teaser for Nurgle demons that have been altered through Urmal's experimentations. Normally, I'd completely rule out demons of Nurgle due to the sheer speed of this creature, because Nurgle demons and even plague marines are incredibly slow. Plague bearers are slower than humans, and a Nurgling would likely be smaller than the between thigh and hip height we see from the perspective of this entity. However, we do know that Urmal has been tampering with cultists within admonition, creating the Dreg Ragers, which corrupt into the mutants due to the amount of stim goo pumped into them, and eventually mutate into a full-blown chaos spawn. This stim goo is a very core substance to everything admonition does, from spreading plague to being somehow involved in a summoning ritual, so it is plausible that perhaps if we see demons of Nurgle introduced in Darktide, they might be a bit different from what we'd expect based on tabletop models and existing lore due to goo intervention. Theory number 3, we're seeing the perspective of a dog as an introduction to a new player class or addition to existing classes that let us control cyber mastiffs. I know this is the current popular theory in the Darktide community, and it almost took my number 1 spot for what I think is most likely, but I realize that what we are more likely to get is a slightly more cynical version of this. Let's talk about the realities of a class that issues order to a dog or multiple dogs. This is reasonably feasible, given that it would be similar to Sienna's bonus necromancer class from Vermintide 2. Fatshark spent a long time on the tech making her skeleton warriors behave how they wanted, noting that these minions don't share the same design or code space as typical bots. So presumably, player-controlled minions would be higher quality in their behavior than Darktide's bots, hopefully significantly higher. Obviously, there's already dogs modeled in Darktide, we've all encountered them, and they have the mechanics for dogs pouncing and meleeing someone. But is that enough to carry a player class that has a core focus on someone controlling those dog minions? Not really. That's where cyber mastiffs come in. Cyber Cybermastiffs are a dog that have a variety of types and origins peppered throughout 40k lore, but we're going to specifically look at the kind that are often companions to Adeptus Arbites, which is the Imperium 5-0. Canine Cybermastiffs employed by Arbites are most often almost completely cybernetic, with only their central nervous system being organic and created by vat growing or 3D printing. This would explain the distinct lack of heavy breathing you would expect to hear from a creature in a dead sprint like we see in the clip. A completely metal cyber dog could also be what we're hearing when the creature goes over the box and hits the ground, then sways to the left and readjusts its path. Of course, it is running over a metal box and a metal floor, which could account for that sound, especially since on its final pounce there's no similar springing sound. So, Speaking of that final pounce, it does seem fairly similar to the dog pounces we see in Darktide, but like I said earlier, one pouncing melee attack doesn't really seem like enough to carry the abilities of a playable minion controlling class. Arbites Cybermastiffs often have guns mounted to them or integrated in them, including classics like flamethrowers and melt-a-guns. So even if Fatshark won't let us have playable melt-a-guns, your dog might be able to. Dogs with mounted guns would make them more viable for Darktide's range-heavy combat, as well as give them the ability to act more defensively against hordes. Considering that the code groundwork for a minion class was done back in Vermintide 2, and dog animal models already exist in Darktide, I'd say that it's a pretty viable option that a class like this could come into the game. However, I personally think the next option is a bit more likely. You've been waiting for me to say it, so jump on the hype train, because this could finally be the tease that we are getting Gene Stealers in Darktide. The second most likely option on my list is the introduction of a new enemy faction, which is Gene Stealers. This is something that not just me, but a lot of people in the Darktide community have been hoping for. There's a couple of voice lines about Maro's encounters with Gene Stealers, as well as the Ogren who has encountered them as well, so it's a topic that definitely comes up in the game itself, and Gene Stealer cults are generally thought to exist in some capacity in more or less every hive city. Tertium would likely be no exception. In fact, the Wrath and Glory tabletop game book for Darktide that's getting a physical copy released later this year even mentions that there are Gene Stealer cults in Tertium. And of course, for those of us who have been playing since launch, a lot of us have been waiting to find out what that possible Xeno sighting in the Deep Hive sector is. I ran a poll in both my Discord community and here on YouTube asking those of you who stopped playing Darktide or don't play it as much as you would normally why that's the case for you. I chose the top 3 complaints I hear the most about the current state of Darktide, and overall the majority of votes was that the gameplay loop was stale, and honestly, I agree. Fatshark has made some major moves in the last year fixing Darktide and bringing it up to a state of quality it should have been in at launch. But at this point, its lack of enemy variety and natural difficulty scaling feels like the biggest bottleneck that's holding the game back. Introducing a second faction will not only make the around 20 or so missions we played to death look and feel fresh, but with an entirely new faction, Fatshark can throw some mechanical curveballs at us that will keep us on our toes and naturally increase the difficulty of the game instead of only just tuning up or down the spawn rate on gunners and bulwarks over and over again. A Gene Stealer cult is not only a highly likely faction to appear from a 40k lore perspective, I also think that it's probably how Fatshark intends to iterate on the work they did for the Necromancer skeleton minions from Vermintide 2. A Gene Stealer cult and the Nurgle cult would by virtue be enemies and be fighting each other for supremacy over Tertium. Going back to that dev blog Fatshark put out about Sienna's skeleton warriors, they specifically say, so having done the groundwork, we now have a bit of tech in place for enemies fighting enemies. We're pretty excited toying around with that for the future. I think the specific wording of enemies fighting enemies here, instead of something that sounds like more player-controlled minions, tells us that they are looking to up the ante and have opposing factions that will naturally encounter and engage each other in combat in future games like Darktide. Though as much as I am fully on Team Gene Stealers for a faction to add into the game, I don't think that's what we're seeing here. I do think this is probably a cyber mastiff, but I don't think we're getting a class. Honestly, what I think is most likely is that this is going to be a new NPC character that is going to get introduced in a new mission, and they are going to have a dog. I know that's a pretty cynical take, and I don't necessarily mean it to be, but it fits with the trend of most major updates introducing a new character. And even if I'm right, and it is an NPC who has a dog, and we're not getting controllable cyber mastiffs, that doesn't mean that nothing big or exciting is coming in this update. I don't think I've seen Fatshark do a teaser trailer like this, letting us know ahead of time that we're going to want to see this announcement as it happens, and obviously this is one incredibly short clip that has ignited a massive conversation of speculation over it, so they knew exactly what they were doing to get some hype going. That says to me that this is going to be more than just a new map or mission and maybe a few weapons. They don't necessarily have to save the huge game-changing updates for anniversaries. Vermintide 2 got Winds of Magic in the summer as a non-anniversary update, and whatever your feelings about the actual game mode, it was when its third faction of Beastmen were introduced. At any rate, I guess we'll find out on the 22nd during the Skulls event, which I will be streaming so we can all lose our minds together. Because there is one more option, and I don't know if the world is ready for this, but what if Grendel was a dog this whole time, and him and Rannick are like that movie Turner and Hooch where Rannick is Tom Hanks? I'm just saying, we can't prove that it isn't Grendel. Thank you guys all so much for your support, especially to these Patreon and YouTube channel members. Leah S., Andrew Brown, Cabus, Ben, Cameron, Darkslide, Valuspa, Kyle Casabom, Frederico Lopez, Lormock, Giorgio, Snort Carl, Zombie Bros, Mr. Moss, Kaizo Chan, Tiger Styles, Craft Day, SS66 Seeker, IT001, Sibical, Cthulhu 625, It's Spider-Man, Taro, Evan Berger, Half Noman, Mary Stone, Catmaman Snow, Yin, Dr. Dead Inside, Bride's Biscuit, Kron Chaos, Daniel Gerber, The Thunder Guardian, Aubrey Bessie, Freedom Frank, Macrove, and Big Guy.